And all of a sudden, I just felt myself leaving my body. The only way I can describe it is like it was like a whoosh. And I ended up floating around in the sky, looking down at my own body and all my compatriots on the top of this cliff. And I'm like, wow, what is going on? And I'm only 15. Okay. There was no fear involved at all. I simply felt expanded. Like I felt like I was part of everything. But the interesting thing is I also felt like me. Like it wasn't like I changed. I was very aware that I was still me. And I was just sort of getting kind of comfortable with this experience. And then all of a sudden again, it was like whoosh. And I went up and all of a sudden I was outside of the earth. And I was looking down on the earth. I was literally looking down on the earth. And I could see all the clouds and I could see the continents and everything. And I was like, wow. And then all of a sudden, I was just getting used to that. And again, whoosh. And all of a sudden I'm out in the middle of the universe, like literally in the universe, because I can see all these spiral galaxies around me. And I had this incredible knowledge because I just looked over and I went, oh, there's the Milky Way, and Earth is like on that little arm over there. And I'm just like, wow, like how did I even know that? Because there was dozens of spiral galaxies around.
Hello, my dear friends. I'm Donald Lee, and this is Expressing and Revealing Your Truth with Donald Lee. It's a podcast in which I help you understand the truth about who you really are and how you can express and reveal that truth in the world. To do that, I interview people who have had transformational spiritual experiences, the type of experiences that many of us wish we had, but never do. Yet by learning from my guests' experiences and the wisdom they've gained from those experiences, all of us can glimpse a bigger vision of who we really are and how we can live our lives more fully, more peacefully, more lovingly. Be sure to download my free mini ebook containing 5 of the 50 parables from my popular book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life. These little parables are short, easy to read, inspiring, and also help you to understand more about who you really are. There's a link in the show notes below to get your free ebook. In this episode, I interview Laura Hoorweg. At age 15, Laura had an out-of-body experience that even took her out of this galaxy. This experience opened her mind and her consciousness to a greater reality, even though it was much later in her life that Laura began to actively pursue her spiritual growth. As with most people, it's been a convoluted journey that has brought her to the point of now being a medium and a spiritual counselor to help other people. I think you will enjoy this great conversation with Laura Hoorweg. Hello once again, my dear friends. We're here today with Laura Hoorweg. Am I pronouncing your name properly, Laura?
Yes, you are. You're actually probably closer to the actual Dutch pronunciation than most people.
Yeah, I've actually been to Holland a couple times, and I've known a few Dutch people over here. I worked with a Dutchman and had a boss for a Dutchman. And he used to always say, you've probably heard this 100 times, you can always tell a Dutchman, but you can't tell him much.
Yeah, that would probably be pretty accurate. Yeah. Only my father was Dutch, so I don't speak Dutch.
Right.
But anyway.
Right. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on my show, my little show. Thank you very much, Laura. It's a delight to have you here. And Laura, you have another incredible story of transformative spiritual experiences and how your life changed. So we're dying to hear that. Just for the sake of my audience here, Laura is another Canadian. I'm in Alberta. It's May 15th, 2026, as we're recording this, and we thought spring had come, but outside my window, it's snowing. It started snowing during the night. It's supposed to snow all day long. And people around here are getting so fed up with snow and winter. So let's have spring already. Anyway, so Laura is in the...
You have to move to BC.
Yeah, well, maybe. Laura is in the lower mainland of British Columbia, where it's always warmer than Alberta. but some are quite a bit wetter than Alberta. So thank you, Laura. And Laura, jump in, tell us your spiritual transformation.
Okay, well, actually, one of my biggest experiences that happened to, which actually have been trying to recreate throughout my life, but I haven't been able to do that, but that's another story. Happened to me when I was 15. I was working actually up in Algonquin Park, which is a massive provincial park in Ontario. And I was
Right.
working for the Y, and it was a canoeing and climbing camp, and where we took kids on canoe trips and they taught them how to do rock climbing and rappelling. And we were doing a training session, the counselors and stuff were doing a training session with the climbing expert that we had that summer. And we had just climbed up a huge cliff, and we were kind of resting on the top of the cliff before we rappel down, because that's what you do when you're rock climbing. You climb up and you rappel, you rappel back down. So we were just resting, and I was just standing on the edge of the cliff, and I was looking out over this immense beauty. And actually, I think this is what triggered this experience, because it was wilderness. It was nothing but beautiful lakes and rivers and forest and rock, because this is Northern Ontario Shield, so beautiful rock and everything. And all of a sudden, I just felt myself leaving my body. The only way I can describe it is like it was like a whoosh. And I ended up floating around in the sky, looking down at my own body and all my compatriots on the top of this cliff. And I'm like, there, I'm like, wow, what is going on? And I'm only 15. Okay. So I'm going like, what is going on here? And then, trust me, there was no drugs or anything involved. Okay, there's none of that stuff involved. And the amazing thing was that I felt perfectly safe. I felt there was no fear involved at all. I simply felt expanded, like I felt like I was part of everything. But the interesting thing is I also felt like me. Like it wasn't like I changed. I was very aware that I was still me. And I was just sort of getting kind of comfortable with this experience. And then all of a sudden again, it was like whoosh. And I went up, and all of a sudden I was outside of the earth, and I was looking down on the earth. And so I'm going to reveal things about myself, because when I was young, it was when they first did all the moon landings and stuff like that. It was
Right.
the first that all that it was actually the first time that we saw Earth from outside the earth. And they interviewed all the astronauts, and they talked about what an incredible experience that was. And all of a sudden I knew all about that, because I was doing the same thing. I was literally looking down on the earth, and I could see all the clouds, and I could see the continents and everything. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And again, I felt totally peaceful, totally um it was really a safe feeling. It was almost like being wrapped up in the womb, before you're born. It was just totally peaceful, totally quiet, and it was amazing. And I was just like, wow, I was blown away again. And then all of a sudden, I was just getting used to that. And again, whoosh. And all of a sudden, I'm out in the middle of the universe, like literally in the universe, because I can see all these spiral galaxies around me. And I had this incredible knowledge, because I just looked over and I went, oh, there's the Milky Way, and Earth is like on that little arm over there. And I'm just like, wow, like how did I even know that? Because there was dozens of spiral galaxies around. And it was just mind blowing. But again, it was just like totally peaceful. I wasn't anxious or afraid or anything like that. If anything, I was more in awe. And
Right.
I was just at this point, I'm thinking, okay, what's next? Okay, because I've done this 3 times now. And I'm like, wow, what's next? And it was kind of like just as I thought that, I had that thought of what's next. It was like in Star Trek, that great big hand, the giant hand came out and grabbed me and yanked me back into my body. And I always describe it, it's like it felt like taking a basketball and trying to stuff it into a Coke bottle. That's exactly what it felt like. Because my consciousness, my energy, however you want to look at it, was so expanded that it actually took me 2 or 3 days afterwards to actually feel comfortable in my body again, because my
Right.
energy had been so expanded. And then
Yeah.
I kind of
I-
sort of like came to back in my body. And then I realized what had happened, because what had actually happened on the ground was that one of the climbing instructors had gotten a little bit nervous. He thought I was too close to the edge of the cliff. So he'd actually grabbed the back of my pants and yanked me back from the edge. And that's when I came plummeting back into my body. So who
Okay.
knows how far this experience would have gone if that hadn't happened. But even
And he
in
wrecked
so
the
much
whole
as that,
thing.
yeah, well, it was still an incredible experience. And
Right.
from this, it so changed my idea of what life was, what we were, because I was outside of my body, and it changed my ideas about death as well. Because I was
Right.
outside of my body, and number one, that meant that I was way more than just my body.
Right.
And number two, I was outside of my body and I wasn't dead. So that transformed the way that I thought about death. And the fact that I was that feeling of expansion and knowing that, well, not knowing, but feeling that, we can be so much more than we actually are, and just when we're in this little physical body. So it really changed everything. And I actually never, so I was 15 at the time. I don't think I ever actually really had a conversation about this experience till probably first time I talked, probably about 10 or 11 years ago. So I never really talked about it. And lately I've talked about it a lot because people love to hear about that story. So it was really, it sort of set me on a different path. I had another experience when I was 11, and then I had this experience at 15. And that's kind of what set what I will say, the kind of like the bedrock of my spirituality between those two experiences. And it's not like I went from 15 and I went on this wild spiritual experience continuous, because I'm going to tell you right now, it's a spiritual journey is not a straight line.
That's right.
That was weird. It's a it's an up and down process.
Right.
Like, for example, I was a teenager then, and I didn't really get into spiritual. And then I got into my 20s, and my 20s were party hardy, like like most people. I didn't really do a lot of things in the spiritual realm. Um, I probably didn't really start getting into spirituality again in terms of reading and experiences and attending events and stuff till my probably early 30s, when that sort of really launched me again back onto my spiritual journey. So that was another climb up the hill. you know. But if I hadn't had those experiences in childhood, I probably wouldn't have even been sort of drawn in that direction. But because I already
Right.
had those experiences, I got drawn to a lot of different new age stuff, reading, events, different groups. Like I said, if I hadn't had that experience, I don't know if I would have kind of keyed in on those interests. So
Right. Because
I had a very different
yeah.
experience than my brother and my sister had. Like, we were brought up in the same family, but I had very, very different experiences.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And in education, I've been a teacher, and there's this saying that a mind once expanded can never return to its former size. And that as teachers, our
Yeah.
job is to expand minds and expand consciousness. So when you had this experience at age 15 of absolutely an
Yeah.
expanded consciousness, an expanded sense of what you are, you could never really,
Yeah.
even though you put that in the
Yeah.
back of your mind, you didn't really think about
Yeah.
it, didn't act on it, didn't transform your life at that point. It you could never go back to the conception of life that you had before because you'd had this experience, and experience is the greatest teacher. It's so much more impactful than reading something in a book or having somebody
Well,
tell you
yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it
so
was
that
in
was pretty, it's
midlife,
pretty much.
in midlife that you became. Often this is like this. in our young adulthood, we're more interested in material things and drinking and boyfriends and girlfriends and all
All
that kind
that
of
good
wink,
stuff.
wink, nod, nod, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And then getting married and having kids. And, then we get into our 30s and more towards middle age, and we start, as somebody once said, the older you get, the more you start thinking about the hereafter. You get to a room in your
Yeah.
house and you think, now what am I hereafter? But you do. You start thinking more
Well,
about
you start thinking
about
about the fact
things
that
like
there's more time behind you than there is in front of you. So and you start thinking about, so what comes, what well, it's weird though, because I had a different kind of life. Because I didn't do the whole married and kids and all that kind of thing. I
okay,
was into my career, and I was into traveling and stuff like that. I was in the corporate world for years. I was in the advertising and marketing business, the newspaper business, for like 30 years.
right. Just a little break from the program to mention a couple of things. Firstly, if you're enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a short comment. It really helps with the algorithm to find more people who would enjoy these interviews. Also, if you're interested in spiritual growth, you might be interested in my series of spiritual books. As a spiritual author and a former band director, I use my little "the band director" trademark in these books because I use music as a metaphor for life and the journey of becoming a musician as a metaphor for our spiritual journey. There are 3 books in this series. The Band Director's Lessons About Life is a book of modern-day parables inspired by events from my teaching career. When you're working with kids, things naturally come up that we sometimes call teachable moments. Little events where you realize there's a bigger lesson happening right now than the alternate F sharp fingering on the clarinet that I was trying to teach. I started writing some of these little stories down and turning them into modern day parables. So, the Band Director's Lessons About Life has 50 little parables. It's a bit like a Chicken Soup for the Soul book. Each parable is about 3 pages long. Each begins with a story that happened at school, and then there's a reflection section that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story. That is, it explains what the spiritual metaphor means. The Band Director's Lessons About Life is easy to read, makes a great gift, and expresses many universal spiritual principles in an easy to understand way. If you want to go deeper in your spiritual growth, I've also published a study guide to accompany the Book of Parables. It turns the Band Director's Lessons About Life into a year-long course in spiritual development. You will spend a week on each of the 50 parables. There is a deeper teaching about the meaning of each parable, reflection and discussion questions, especially helpful if you would like to use the study guide in a group setting, and a different meditation for each lesson. The third book in this series is a little book titled The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. This little book explains a simple 3-step process for putting your spiritual growth into high gear. You might also be interested in my 2-book series about the craziness in our world today. The first book, What the Hell is Going On? The web of fraud that is enslaving everyone and how we can escape to freedom, is still the best big picture expose of what's really going on behind all this craziness. It includes a spiritual perspective of what's happening, which most books leave out. But it also looks at the economics, the philosophy, the psychology, the history, etc., of the many trends that just don't make sense and are, in fact, elaborate frauds. The second book in this series focuses more on solutions to the mess we're in. It's The Way Forward: How to Escape the Totalitarian Control of the New World Order and Heal from its Trauma. This book explains the 3 types of warfare we're being subjected to: spiritual warfare, psychological warfare, and fifth-generation warfare, and how we can sensibly respond on these three levels of body, mind, and spirit. You can learn more about all of my books at my website, www.cominghomespirit.com, because after all of us are on a spiritual journey back home to God. So that's cominghomespirit.com. You can also go directly to my Shopify page at cominghomespirit.myshopify.com, where you can purchase my books directly from me in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. I can now ship paperback books to the United States and Canada. If you're enjoying this podcast, I really think you'll enjoy my many books as well. Now, back to the program.
I was running these dual lifetimes. I was running my corporate life and I was running my spiritual life, and those two didn't meet at all. And in
It's
fact,
so common.
people from either side of that would never recognize me in the other. So that went on for a long time. And then when about 12 years ago, kind of when the newspaper business went into the toilet, uh they started offering buyouts and all these lovely things. I said, "Oh yeah, write me a check. I'm out of here," because things got really kind of nasty in business. And I just said, "Give me my check. I'm out of here." And I went through a series of things, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And then ran in, and I actually, before I discovered a few things, I thought because I had all this experience, and I did extremely well at my job, I thought, I won't have any trouble finding another job. Wrong. I didn't realize how much ageism was out there. I was actually working with a couple of headhunters, and one of the headhunters was we got to be friends, and she says, "Laura, I'm really not supposed to tell you this, but you got to be honest with you." She said all her clients, who are of course the employers, have said to her, "We don't want to see anyone who's over the age of 45." And I'm like, "What?" And so I pretty quickly got the idea that it was going to be very difficult to find something in my sort of advertising marketing area. And then I decided I wanted to go more back into the marketing side. And then I realized that's not what I really wanted to do. And as this happened, my partner died suddenly. Um, yeah, so that sent me off into, so basically this is what happens in my life. Most people have, when they have a major shift in their life, maybe one or two areas of their life kind of explodes or implodes. Every area of my life imploded and exploded at the same time about 12 years ago.
Right.
Because I had ditched a 30-year career. I'd found out that I was going to have a really hard time finding work, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then shortly after that, my partner passed suddenly. So that just, my whole world blew up. And if you've ever had somebody close to you pass, a funny thing happens. Okay. Not only do you get into the heavy grieving stage, but whenever you're in that heavy grief stage, what ends up happening is everything that you haven't addressed or addressed fully in your life, i.e., swept under the carpet, comes up for examination. So suddenly you're not only inundated with grieving, but you're inundated with all these issues that you either haven't dealt at all with or you haven't fully dealt with.
Right.
Basically from the time you're born up until the time this thing happens. So there was a lot of things. I actually went into about a year and a half of a super heavy healing process, a
Right.
healing journey.
And yeah, I mean, what you described, perhaps unfortunately, many people are going through these
Yeah.
days, with all the changes in the world, and it looks like it's going to get worse with artificial intelligence is going to decimate now um, professions that previously weren't decimated. You're still younger than I am, but I remember the upheaval that came about as a result of personal computers beginning in the 1980s and hit really hard in the 90s, it completely decimated secretaries. Nobody remembers that anymore. Like secretaries, they just, instead of like my dad, for most of his career, had a secretary. And towards the end of his career in the early 1990s, they started getting rid of secretaries and gave all these guys computers. Well, my dad, and I saw it not only with my own dad, but with other people in the company I was working for, you know, in their late 50s, early 60s. And now, instead of dictating letters and memos and stuff to a secretary, they were given computers and said, well, type your own. And I
Oh
don't
no,
think
I
this
was around
immediate
then. Yeah, I'm older
yeah,
than you
I
think I
don't
am.
think this immediately resulted in efficiency gains, because I
No.
remember watching one of my bosses at one point kind of picking out, on a computer, trying to do stuff. And yeah. Anyway, secretaries were gone. It decimated middle management. Computers did, because the main function of all the layers of middle management is communication up and down through the
Yeah.
organizational structure. So when you can communicate to everybody, with one email message to the whole department or the whole company or whatever, you don't need all these middle managers. So it decimated the managerial class. It decimated secretaries. It like the whole change in work. Um, and now we're going to see that, and we're already seeing, well, of course, you had the experience with the newspaper industry
Oh,
almost being completely wiped out. And so then the advertising that was associated with that, and marketing and advertising has all gone online, which is kind of a
yeah.
whole new kettle of fish for advertising and marketing people. And everybody's been struggling to figure it out. And not only that, it keeps changing constantly. And now artificial intelligence has come into that sphere,
Yeah.
and even the tech companies are laying people off because they're being replaced by artificial intelligence. It's going to happen with cab drivers and truck drivers. I've heard already there are some trucking
Doctors,
companies that
lawyers,
have replaced started replacing drivers with um, essentially robot automatic
self-driving
driving
cars.
cars and trucks and stuff like that, but it's going to replace doctors and lawyers. Like, what do you need a lawyer for? Like, if you can
Yeah.
put it in, you can put the details of your case into a legal AI, and there is such things, even called that, I think,
Yeah.
legal AI, and they can come up with all the arguments that you need. They can give a citing previous case law, and come up with what the argument your opposition is going to have, and how to rebut. Like,
Yeah.
that can all be done in minutes. You don't need days and days of expensive lawyers to do this research. It can be done in seconds or minutes. And the same with doctors. You put in your, information, your symptoms and stuff, and they can diagnose you better than doctors, because no human can remember all all the
Yeah.
stuff, right?
All
The
the
way
stuff. Yeah.
computers can. So yeah, there's a lot more coming. People being, their work lives being disrupted, careers being disrupted and changed, and then that leads to a kind of, like you said, when something traumatic like that in your life happens, it brings up lots of other stuff. So the weaknesses in your domestic relationships, whatever those are, come to the fore when there's some other stress, right? So yeah, I've
It
kind of
gets
gone on a bit of a rant
interesting.
here, but this is sort of multiple traumas, right? And the whole, many of us have gone and will go through it and are going through it, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And really, all of humanity is going through trauma as well, as a result of lots of things that we could call it's kind of like a birth trauma, right? Into what people have give different names to, or this process of spiritual ascension into kind of a new consciousness for humanity. But we got to go through this traumatic birth process in the meantime.
Yeah, I would say it's going to get worse before it gets better. But the thing that keeps me going always is the fact that I actually know that it's going to get better.
Yes.
Um, and honestly, I have had from the moment I was born, I've had such a challenging life that I have built up. And now I kind of see the purpose to that I've built up this incredible resiliency. And I just feel, there's a lot of people around that have pretty much there's a lot of people that think they've had difficult lives, but not really. Okay. Um, they're
It's
going to have a real, You're
The
going to have a real
difficult life,
problem.
yeah, the difficult life syndrome is definitely on the spectrum, right? It's like
Yes.
the old
Yeah.
story. Yeah, I complained that I had no shoes until I met somebody who had no feet.
Yes. This is what I'm saying. And I was just going to say there's quite a large percentage of people who I would say have pretty much sort of skated through life and have had the odd thing happen to them, but really and there's some big things that are going to be coming up, and I'll tell you, because I don't we haven't talked about this yet, but I am a psychic medium,
Right.
and I'm very connected to spirit and very connected to my guides. And actually this will be interesting. Back in 2020, during the whole COVID period, I was like, okay, like, I started asking my guides a lot of questions because there was a lot of things coming up, and I was like, okay, what's going to happen with this? And they basically told me in about 2020 that between 2020 and 2030, the world was going to change more. He said, when we stand in 2030 and we look back, we're not even going to recognize,
Oh yeah.
how we got to where we were, because there was going to be basically, they said 300 years of change for humanity in that 10-year period. Okay. Now that
Right.
was in 2020, and we're already in 2026. Okay.
Yeah, we're
So
halfway through.
yeah, we're halfway through, but okay, I usually say to people, if you look at the history of humanity, most of that change of the last 300 years has happened in the last 100 years. Okay. So even
Yeah.
that's easier to get our heads around. So even if you just say, okay, in the last 100 years, that's a tenfold increase in terms of how quickly things are happening. Because from
Yeah.
2020 to 2030, that's only 10 years. So to see,
Yeah.
even if we say there's going to be 100 years of change, okay, in 10 years, that's like still, wow, that's like tenfold, okay?
Yes.
So there's no question, and they sort of indicated that the pace of that change was going to be increasing exponentially. Okay, not one, two,
Yeah.
three, but two, four, six, eight. So we're now in the second half of that 10-year span. And in case you didn't notice, things are changing more and more rapidly all the time.
Oh
So
yeah.
I totally believe what they said. And the other thing that they told me, because we were right in the deepest part of the pandemic at that point, in late 2020, early 2021.
Right.
And I said, well, what's going to happen with this whole pandemic thing? And it was really interesting what they said. They said there's going to be another pandemic, but wait a minute, wait for it. The next pandemic, which already kind of started or got triggered during the COVID, was the next pandemic is going to be a pandemic of mental illness. And we can already see that
Oh,
happening. Okay.
oh,
It's
absolutely.
it started, people started having real problems during the COVID pandemic, because all their kind of crutches were most, or not all, but most of their crutches and how people distract themselves was taken away during the lockdowns and all that kind of thing that was going on,
Yeah.
and the socialization and not being able to go out to movies and bars and shopping and whatever your poison pill was, it
Yeah.
pretty much disappeared. And not only
Yeah.
that, but people were forced to confront their relationships, okay? Their
Yeah.
relationships with their partners, their relationship with their families, their relationships with themselves, okay, which was a huge thing because all these distractions were gone.
Yeah.
A lot of relationships ended during that period. But
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
haven't seen anything yet. I've started already seeing, how shall I put this? My guides always tend to create circumstances where I see things first. I see things ahead of time, because then I'm much better able to help other people. So I've
Right.
really started noticing this last, I would say, 12 months or so, running into so many people that are so obviously having major mental illness issues.
Right.
And these are just ordinary people. Like
Yes.
I could give you examples, but it's actually been quite shocking. So it's like I get told things ahead of time, then I get evidence, and then I go, yeah, and then I look back to what I was told and I go, that's exactly what's happening. So it's like
Yeah.
I'm told, I get evidence, and then I go, yeah, that's what's going on. So that's the
Well, I
other
mean,
thing.
it's yeah, and it probably shouldn't have been too hard to predict that from a whole bunch of standpoints. I mean, when you take the fact for my whole life, just a little aside here, for my whole life, I've been interested in health and fitness, and there's
Hmm.
probably hardly a week goes by at any time during my life where I haven't read something or learned something about health and fitness. And in the last little while, I've been coming across more articles on what are now called super agers. So people like me, lots of white hair, old, but are still, as mentally sharp and really as physically healthy as
Hmm.
middle-aged people. So our minds are not declining, and what they found, it's interesting because you think, well, and I've always thought, well, yeah, like you got to take care of yourself, you got to eat healthy food and avoid the junk and avoid drugs and keep yourself physically fit and all this kind of stuff. And so I read this article and it said that, yeah, everybody thought that. And then as we look at this group of super agers, this is a University of,
I
oh,
know the report you're talking about.
yes, it was somewhere in Illinois
Yeah.
or Michigan, maybe somewhere up there. Anyway, at Leading University, and they have a department of aging or something like that, a
Yep.
group that looks at aging, and they have a group of several dozen super agers, like people who are really old, and they're tracking them, and they, all this kind of stuff. And they said, yeah, we expected to find all these things, and certainly some of our super agers, people who are 90, 100 years old, yeah, some of them are like that. But there's also some who are like chronic smokers. They're always drinking all the time. They're overweight. They eat junk food. Yeah, they think, what's going on with this? They found the number one factor in being a super ager, in not experiencing the mental and physical decline that we normally associate with
Yeah.
aging. The number one factor is
Social
socialization,
connection. Yeah.
social connection.
Yeah.
Number one factor. And we know that with babies, right? They have another
Well,
story about
that's why
being a
there's
bunch,
been a
but
lot of studies in Japan, and this is where it actually originated. They were trying to figure out why these Japanese people were so incredibly healthy. They looked at their diet and everything. That was all great. But then again, in that study, the number one factor was because of their socialization and the
yeah.
fact that they were connecting constantly, like every day, with other people. That's what caused a lot of the problems during the pandemic, is
Oh,
because so many people were
absolutely.
isolated.
Yeah. And instead of the human contact that we all absolutely need for our mental and
Yeah,
our physical and our spiritual health, right? What were we forced to replace it with? Marijuana, alcohol, and Netflix, all three of
yeah.
which are going to essentially
And
rot
social
your mind,
media.
destroy your psychological and emotional and spiritual health.
Yeah.
So, not surprising that this led a lot of people on a downward spiral in terms of their mental health.
Well, see,
Absolutely.
the preemptive to this, even before the pandemic, was social media. And it continues to
Yes.
be a very, very isolating factor because people
Yeah.
actually believe that friends that they've made online are real friends.
Yeah.
And they're not unless you continue that friendship outside of social media.
Yeah.
That's a entirely different thing. It doesn't mean that you can't connect with people, have fun, learn stuff and all that great stuff. But you still have to have, that's why I've been harping on this, that you still have to have face-to-face socialization with people.
Yes.
If you've got that balanced, it's fine. But if you are relying on social media or even what we're doing here, this is a great adjunct. to
Yes.
keep in touch with people or keep in touch with families or friends at a distance, but you still need that face-to-face socialization.
Yeah,
And they've actually
absolutely.
done some interesting studies too, with children who have, instead of going to physical school, they've been either doing uh, homeschooling or online schooling, and it doesn't work very well because the major thing of kids going to school is the personal interaction and
Yeah.
being with other children
Yeah.
and teachers.
Yeah, and if you have a big family, you can have that social interaction and the
You
personal
can't
relationship
do it.
within the
Yeah.
family. But if you've
Yeah.
got one or two kids and they're trying to learn at home and it's almost all computer based, you're not going to have that
No,
human interaction. So
no.
it's not as simply as it's not as simple as just saying no homeschooling, right? Homeschooling is fine
Oh, no, no,
in
that's what I'm
in the
saying.
right context.
In the right context, yes, but
Yeah.
you can't simply rely on that, especially if there isn't other, because there's always other, you could homeschool somebody and your kid might have huge, contacts in your community around home and be
Yep.
out playing with kids and all that. That's fine, but see, a lot of times that's not what ends up happening.
Yeah.
And that they proved that during COVID when kids were doing online school, most kids' education went to the toilet. There was a
Yeah.
huge percentage, especially with the upper grades, high school kids, who like basically went from being A students to failing and becoming very depressed and not ending up graduating. Like there was a ton of this stuff going on, and they basically put it all up to the fact that that whole socialization of school, and interacting, and not only that, it's not just socialization, because you have to remember, in the younger grades you can get away with a lot, but when you think about what goes on, like what topics that you're learning in high school, like the sciences, chemistry and physics and all that, that also employs doing things,
Yeah.
experiential learning. And you cannot do that. You can't do chemistry experiments online. You can't do that kind of stuff. So there was a huge thing. It's not just the social aspect of it, but it's also the experiential learning. And even for young children, they need that as well, but it's not so essential with some of the subjects that they're learning because they're just learning, basic math, reading
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah,
that.
and
So
it's
it's
actually
interesting.
it's yeah, in the younger grades, you actually learn a rather small amount of knowledge,
Yes.
whereas in the upper grades, you're actually learning a large amount of knowledge that you can't just
Yeah.
cram in.
No, no, you can't. And like I said, a huge amount of it is experiential learning. So there's a big difference. Well, it's just like you were talking about earlier. It's one thing to read something, okay, and gain knowledge
Yeah,
through reading a book. It's a whole nother thing to actually live that experience and actually do it in my own way. This brings me back to my own work because when I work with people, I use my spiritual gifts. It's a combination of my spiritual gifts and my huge amount of life experience because there's something so powerful about being able to look somebody in the eye and say, whether it's online or in person, it doesn't really matter, and say, I understand what you're going through because I've been through it also. Okay.
right,
There's a big difference between that and somebody who's simply either counseling you or coaching you from a perspective of book learning. It's just not the
right.
same thing. Now,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that that's totally useless, but it's very, very different. And I've actually had clients, I'll give you an example. Actually, a client wrote me a testimonial and she said, Laura, I learned more. It was more meaningful and more valuable to me to spend an hour session with you than I actually did in 3 years of therapy. So
yeah.
that's pretty profound. And that's the
Yes, yes,
difference.
it
That's
is.
the
So,
difference.
so what, Laura? Can you go back, kind of pick up, your own story
Mm.
of personal and spiritual growth, where you kind of gave up, I guess, on trying to find a job in the advertising field,
Oh, okay.
and then you started to develop your latent spiritual gifts.
Well, actually, when I was When I was still working in the corporate world, I was doing a little bit on the side. I was doing what would be called readings for people on the side. So
Right.
I was doing a bit of that at the same time. But after I went through my implosion and explosion of quitting my job and then not being able to find a job and then my partner passing away, I just went, "Ah," like, I was just like, "Wow," like, and I went through a very intense, probably about a year and a half of, healing journey where I did all kinds of alternative things. I spent about 6 weeks in Brazil at, John of God, who is a trance healer and his whole compound. And I did that for about 6 weeks. Then I came home very shortly. And when I was in Brazil, I was led to information and guided to ayahuasca. And
Right.
so then shortly after that, I went to Peru in the Peruvian jungle and did a 3-week intensive ayahuasca journey, which was mind blowing. And I think that even connected me more with my spiritual gifts.
Right.
And then I came
It does. It
back.
does for many. It does for many people,
Yeah.
right? It's an exceedingly dramatic
Oh,
and
it's very
also
dramatic.
perfectly unique to each person and each time experience.
And with people don't realize with ayahuasca, every time you do it, every time you do the plant medicine, the journey is completely different. Like you can have a sort of a like an LSD cosmic experience, like what's his name? Oh, I forget his name. Uh
Are you
Terrence
talking about
McKenna.
David Icke?
Yeah, Terrence
What?
no, Terrence McKenna's experience.
Oh,
It's
yes, yes,
really
yes.
funny actually. My partner, who was 10 years older than me, he actually was running around Haight-Ashbury. He was only like 16, running around Haight-Ashbury naked and doing wine laced with LSD and the whole. Oh yeah, he had a trippy history.
Oh,
But that's pretty funny.
that's a great life for a 16-year-old. I'm jealous, but whatever. My 16-year-old
Yeah,
life was somewhat different.
he grew up in California, so he had an interesting Tim had a very interesting life. He packed a lot of living because he actually passed away very young. He was only 62 when he passed. So he packed a lot of living into a very short period of time.
Right,
But that's a whole
right.
nother story. Where was I? Oh yeah, so then I came back after doing the ayahuasca intensive journey and I was trying to decide what the heck I was burning through money like crazy. Thank God for the golden
Yeah,
handshake. I had to decide on what I wanted to do. So I had also gotten really into yoga. So I kind of decided, oh, I think I want to be, a yoga teacher. So I had to get trained in my teaching as quickly as possible so I could get out there and teach and make money. So I ended up doing a 1-month long intensive teacher training course in Costa Rica, which was wild. I didn't realize it until I got back that I was really never meant to actually teach. Yoga is still a huge part of my life, but I was never meant to actually teach yoga. So,
right.
which has happened to me so many times. I've done things thinking I was supposed to be a practitioner and realized, that that wasn't it. So then I came back and from that, and I had made a commitment because my partner Tim had spent 20 years living in Hawaii and he loved Hawaii. So I took his ashes to spread his ashes in Hawaii, which he loved deeply. And it just happened coincidentally, that I don't believe in coincidences,
Yeah,
that there
right.
was a that there is a big yoga thing going on the North Shore where Tim lived for 20 years. So I went to the yoga there was a two-part journey back to Hawaii. One was a ceremony for spreading his ashes, the other was this big wanderlust yoga thing. So, but anyway, I didn't end up doing that. So then I came back and I still didn't know what I would do. And then I got basically led into starting my business that I'm doing now with my spiritual counseling and my intuitive coaching. So that happened in, was it early 2015? Yeah, it's early 2015. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you start kind of connecting with your guides and getting direction from them? Because I'm presuming since you're kind of running around madly in all directions that you weren't getting guidance from the
Oh, no,
other realm.
I was, because like I said, it was like I was led from one thing to another. Like,
Okay.
the
They were all steps.
synchronicity,
They
they
were
were
all
all
steps you
steps.
needed. Yeah. Okay.
They were all steps. They just didn't mean exactly I was led to all of them, but as
Yeah.
so often happens, you don't really fully understand the purpose of why you're being led there until after a lot of times after the experience. I've
Right.
found that throughout my whole life. Like I've had before I even realized that I was truly guided to certain things, I had numerous experiences where I was led to something and didn't really realize I had been led there until after. I
Right.
many right from when I was young, even the experience I talked about on the cliff, I was led to that camp. I actually went there the first year as a camper, and then I came back and I was a junior counselor, and then I was took a year off, and I was led to this too. I became in Ontario. They have when you're 17, they have a program called Junior Forest Rangers, and that was a
Right.
spiritual. That was another spiritual experience. So I that summer I was a junior forest ranger, and then I came back to the Y camp and I was a canoe tripping guide for another summer. And then I went to university after that. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I
I think that's true of all of our lives. Not all
yeah.
of us realize that, but certainly think most of us can look back in our lives and think, oh, okay,
Yeah.
that thing that I did there,
Yeah.
that fit into something later in my life, and that there was like it's like kind of strands that float through the ether, and eventually they come
Well,
together into a tapestry.
it's really funny because my guides just said it's a Lego puzzle because
Yeah.
it's just one piece fits into another. And it's something that I all because a lot of times I have people coming to me and they go, oh, they're so upset because they figured they wasted their time doing this or wasted their time in that job or this doing this or not doing this. And I just say, there's no such thing as wasted time, because everything that happens to you has a purpose in your life. Whether you know it at the time or you ever learn the true purpose, doesn't matter. It all has a purpose. Like I said, I had a pretty challenging childhood, a pretty challenging early adulthood, and I would not be the person I am today. And I would not be able to help all the people that I've helped over the past 10, 11 years if I
Right.
hadn't had those experiences.
Right. And so you kind of gradually were at the point in your story where you got kind of guided into the work that you're doing
Yes,
now. Is that right?
that I'm doing now.
And
Mhm.
can you tell us kind of how that came together a
Well,
decade or so
I
ago?
wanted I spent 30 years, this is the quick version. I spent 30 years convincing people to buy things that they really didn't need. And I figured that it was about time that I started helping people to make their lives work. And I thought, well,
Right.
how can I do that? And then I went, oh, dummy, you have this gift, you have these gifts. Because not only do I do spiritual counseling and intuitive coaching, I also am a medium. So I also use my mediumship skills to help people through the grieving process. Because I'm not really an evidentiary medium, because those mediums are really there to convince people that there's life after death and show them all these proofs and all that stuff. I don't really care if you believe in life after death or not, but because I've had people who are totally do not believe in that stuff, who I've actually helped, because I have two commitments. I have commitment to the living, and I have a commitment to those on the other side. And my commitment to the people on the other side is to deliver their messages faithfully to their loved ones on this side. And
Right.
my commitment to the people on this side are to help them heal from their grief. And this is what the messages of love, and I can give you an example. This is an
Sure.
example that people really love. It's one of the strongest examples I've ever seen, and what keeps me committed to that work is in one of my I always do mediumship sessions in group format because it's just better. You've got people, the energy and everything. It's just better. Long discussion why that's better. But anyway, a young man came through to a gal who wasn't even directly related to him, except she knew the family. She knew his family. And what had happened is this young man had been in a single vehicle accident on his motorcycle and had left the highway and driven directly into a large tree and was killed. And during the police investigation, because there was no tire marks, there was no skid marks, it looked like he hadn't tried to stop or avoid the accident or anything. They actually ended up, and to no fault of theirs, they followed the evidence. They ended up saying that he had committed suicide. He'd done this intentionally to take his own life. And this young man came through in the session, and he was adamant that he took responsibility for causing his own passing, but it was not intentional in any way. And the true story was he had been very ill. Had a really bad cold, and he had taken a lot of over-the-counter drug cold medicine. And he knew he shouldn't be driving his motorcycle, but he was sick, so he wanted to get home. And he ended up falling asleep on his motorcycle. And that's why there was no skid marks. There was nothing, that he tried to evade. He literally fell asleep at the wheel and drove straight into a tree and caused his own death, which he was very adamantly that he knows he was responsible. But the thing is, the real powerful thing about this story is because it was ruled a suicide, it wreaked havoc on his family. His family was just demolished by it. And if you know anything about young men, suicide among young men is contagious. His younger brother was on the verge of suicide himself because of this, and so was a couple of this young man's friends. So it had destroyed both his family and his friends, and It was continuing to have a very, very negative effect. And the fact that he came through and delivered this message to this gal who knew his family and could carry that message, I call them messengers. Sometimes you're in a mediumship session, not for yourself, but to carry a message to somebody else. And once this message was delivered, saved his family, saved his little brother, his friends. It was really miraculous how it changed the energy and just helped so many people. So that's what I'm saying. Some of these things can be so powerful. And there's a huge percentage of people that are harboring all this guilt because they weren't with their loved one when they passed, or, they had a huge argument before they passed. All these things that have been destroying people's lives. And once they get these messages, they realize that stuff doesn't matter, and it's not, it's not their fault. And they can release that guilt or whatever, that resentment, whatever it happens to be, and they can get on with their lives and have fulfilling lives. And that's a huge gift, huge gift.
That's beautiful. Well, so people who might want to contact you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Is it through your website, Laura?
Yeah, it's through my website, which is just www.spiritspeaks2.me. Or you can email me directly if you're interested in setting up a session or getting more information. It's really simple. It's just Laura Hoorweg at gmail.com. And I'm sure our lovely host is going to put all my contact information in the show notes. And I'm all over social media. I'm heavily on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I do a little bit on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm not really that hard to find.
Oh, good. So that website again is Spirit Speaks, then the number 2.com.
.me.
Oh, .me. Okay, thank you very much. That I'm starting to see that a little bit. It's not common yet.
I did that 11 years ago. So again, I found that very synchronistically, because the name of my business and the name of my website is Spirit Speaks to Me. So when I found that handle, I was like, oh, that's perfect. It doesn't get much better than that.
Oh, perfect. So it's spiritspeaks2.me.
.me, yeah.
Okay, Spirit Speaks to Me. That's That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
My website is cominghomespirit.com, because all of us are in a spiritual journey back home to God. That's the idea behind that name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very cool too.
Awesome. Laura, it's been a joy to have this time with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story of spiritual unfoldment and development and how you're helping other people today, because that's really, as we grow spiritually, we come to know more and more that that's what we're here for, right? To help each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And thank you for
Well, thank
having
you
me.
so-
It's been really fun.
It's great. God bless you in your work, and
Yeah.
may your journey be ever upward, Laura.
Thanks you very much. Thanks, Donald.